I think that fair value accounting that you mentioned there is very significant in its implications. How likely is it, my finger's just not on the pulse of accounting, so I don't know, how likely is it that it is going to become a thing as you described?
Yeah, it's really not possible for a GAAP-based corporation to buy this in volume when you have indefinite intangible accounting. Indefinite intangible accounting is the accounting treatment you would give to any asset you wanted people not to buy. Like if I was certain I did not want you to buy it, I would assign indefinite intangible accounting treatment to it. Because what it means is you can never generate an investment gain. You can only generate investment losses. They ratchet down to zero. And you can't even book them as investment losses. They end up being booked as operating losses. So if Facebook were to buy $10 billion of Bitcoin and make $100 billion on it, but Bitcoin traded down 50% before they made the $100 billion, what the world would see is that Facebook's core business made no money, that they lost $5 billion in the core business because it's an operating loss. And then the world would think that they had $5 billion in assets instead of $100 billion in assets. So you see, there's no way the CFO of Facebook is going to take that kind of volatility and toxicity on their P&L. It screws up all the operating reporting, and it also screws up the balance sheet. So that's why it hasn't happened. The reason that fair value accounting is so much better is because fair value accounting splits the balance sheet accounting from the P&L accounting. So when I buy the $10 billion, if my core business made $5 billion, then I show a $5 billion operating gain. And then if Bitcoin trades down 50%, I show a $5 billion investment loss. So I separate the two. So investors in about 10 seconds can see that there's no problem with the core business and that the volatility came in the balance sheet. And then when Bitcoin, if it were to go back to 10,000, you'd show a $5 billion investment gain the next quarter. And so you reverse it. And if it were to go up by a factor of 10, you would show $90 billion of investment gains to follow, you see. So, but when you have the gains, when you have $5 or $10 billion of investment gains per quarter, you would separate that from the $5 billion of operating income a quarter. So if you're an outside investor, you can say, okay, I can see this is the balance sheet contribution to the earnings. This is the operating contribution to the earnings. If you're a CFO, you can defend that. Now, imagine if I collapse that and I said, well, there are no investment gains and your operating results are awful. And now you're the CFO and you have to go in front of your outside shareholders and explain how you screwed up the core business and the balance sheet has nothing to show for it. Okay, now you've got a problem, right? So you can't really expect a big publicly traded company with a healthy business and a set of shareholders that understand the core business to really want to get heavily into Bitcoin. That's why the Teslas and the blocks of the world, they've invested, you can invest 5% of your capital or 2% of your capital. But when you get to the point where you invest 50% of your capital and you could have a material swing in the quarter, it becomes very confusing. So yeah, the accounting does matter. And it'll be beneficial when it goes to fair value accounting.
Well, that really excites me because on top of the accounting, there's just the individual career risk. And many people, especially in corporations, they just don't want to do anything too wacky or too wild or too bold. You do need people such as yourself who would sort of prepare to take the plunge are unusual in that sort of corporate world. And so a change of the accounting system changes the career risk as well as the actual accounting itself.
Yeah, if you want to introduce a new asset class, and when's the last asset class introduced into the corporate world, right? Like not in our lifetime has there been a new one. I mean, corporate treasurers have basically invested in sovereign debt, treasury bonds or corporate bonds, maybe, for the last 50 years. So you want to introduce a new asset class. Well, you need to normalize the accounting. You also need to normalize the regulatory disclosures, like the SEC disclosures. There's a lot of nuance about, well, how do I even disclose what I've got on my balance sheet and how it affected my P&L, right? And so the accounting drives that. And then you have to normalize the guidelines for banks. Like, is a bank allowed to own or hold Bitcoin, and how is it treated as collateral versus having real estate loans or securities or sovereign debt on your balance sheet? So, we've been working on this for 3 years, right? The accounting industry has been working on it for 3 years, since 2020. It's 2023, so maybe over the course of 4 years, they will evolve. Generally, the regulators will evolve over 2, 3, 4 years, but I mean, a year is like light speed. It doesn't happen in a year.
No.
4 years is more likely. So I think that when we go into 2024, I think there'll be a lot more clarity about a lot of these disclosures. Just like, for example, the entire crypto industry is now starting to realize that there's a difference between FTT token and Solana and BTC. But 12 months ago, there would be massive debate getting people to accept the idea that there's something like a crypto security. Mm-hmm. The entire word crypto asset security, that has been introduced and adopted in the crypto industry. But 24 months ago, they didn't have that phrase. Like, people didn't recognize that. They weren't willing to even embrace this issue. So you can't really move forward until the body of industry investors understand the difference between a digital currency, a digital security, a digital token, and a digital commodity. And 24 months ago, people didn't understand the difference. In fact, you have to get every senator.
I'm not even sure I do now, Michael.
Okay, so that's the primary point. Every senator, every congressperson, every governor, every mayor, every billionaire, every corporate CFO, every journalist in the finance industry has to understand the difference between those things before we can move forward.